Patreon wants to judge you and me on what we do outside of the Patreon platform. And if that's the case, should I just cancel and be done with it? Hey everyone, this is Kevin the Apptrepreneur, and we're going to talk about something a little different. I mean, Patreon is, in a sense, an app. It is a money transaction app. And by the way, if you have any YouTube channel of any kind, you should have a Patreon account. It's very, very helpful. And I say that with a very bit of irony because Patreon, kind of like PayPal and Amazon, are two services that I use to make money that I don't particularly like using to make money. There is something to be said when a company becomes so big and so synonymous with success in a certain area that you have to use that service even if you don't like the company. Now, I make plenty of videos slamming Amazon, and I don't buy from them. But I have also admitted that I do have an Amazon store because, you know, you still make money doing it, and I'm in the business of making money. For that matter, I really don't like PayPal's policies. I've never liked their policies. And one of my other channel, one of the very first videos I made, if not the first video I made, was how to avoid the PayPal scam, which shows just how little I think about them, and yet it's really difficult to go on eBay and sell without PayPal. So now we are in another situation for me, another conundrum where I find myself greatly disliking and disapproving of things that Patreon does to the point where I want to cancel my account. And yet it is still potentially a very big part of how I make money. And I don't know if this is the correct video to be having this conversation. I don't know if we're ultimately even going to have the conversation, whether that's ethical or not. But Patreon definitely has been on my, list for the last few weeks. Well, is it weeks? Maybe days. I don't know. Anyway, this all started when a YouTuber named Sargon of Akkad was banned from Patreon. He was banned because he used a very bad racial slur in a live stream on someone else's channel 10 months ago. And if that sounds a little, I don't know what part of that sounds crazy to you. The fact that he used the slur, or the fact that Patreon found it in a very, very obscure place and not even on his own channel. And Patreon, despite having a warning system in place, decided to ban his account. And this has gotten a lot of people notably upset. Sam Harris, famous atheist and author, actually deleted his Patreon account. He was one of the top supported patrons on the page. For that matter, Dave Rubin's, a liberal atheist YouTube commentator, I'm just throwing them out just so you know where they stand, because I know people are going to bring politics into this. How can you not? He has also stated his intent to leave Patreon. In fact, and he has teamed up with Jordan Pearson, a conservative author and commentator, to create a new Patreon-like funding platform. And I will definitely be signing up for that platform when it is made available. Now, what does this have? Now, the reason I bring up their personal beliefs and their political affiliations is because it seems pretty clear that in this situation, people on both political sides have, for the most part, agreed this is nonsense. Especially since Patreon has come out and they have actually acknowledged that they are not following their own rules. Liberal YouTube commentator Tim Pool and conservative commentator Matt Christensen have both been contacted by Patreon executives personally. And in both cases, both men walked away feeling rather unimpressed with the response. Especially Christensen, who actually transcribed his conversation, where the person who, I guess she does PR work for them, for Patreon or something, acknowledged that they weren't following the rules to a T, that it was subjective, and that it would always be subjective, even though you write rules so that subjectivity doesn't have to be a factor. Like, hey, you know what? You say, if you use this word on your channel, you can get suspended. Or actually what their language is like, if you are caught doing offensive things, you will receive a warning, which Sargon didn't receive. Because apparently they felt the overall context of his videos did not warrant a warning. It just didn't warrant a warning. So I don't like Sargon of Akkad, for the record. I should probably have opened with that. But this bothers me. This really bothers me, especially someone who does news commentary. Now, here's the thing. Most of my news is about Uber, Lyft, and sometimes Postmates. And on my other channel, I am mostly talking about MoviePass and other things. These topics are not particularly controversial, especially in the fact when I constantly say Uber sucks, there's not a lot of people who are going to disagree with me on that. But once in a while, a controversial topic does pop up, and these actions with what's going on with Patreon makes me concerned about losing my Patreon page and potentially losing at one point a significant chunk of my livelihood. For example, about a year and a half ago, I commented on a study that was being taken way out of context. People looked at the study and they said that Uber and Lyft were just as racist towards black people as the cabs were. That Uber and Lyft drivers would not pick up minorities, like a certain amount of percentage, like they were more likely to pick up a white person than a minority. That was not what the study said. The study only showed that Uber drivers were far more likely to pick people up in safe neighborhoods than unsafe neighborhoods. Now, unfortunately, in some areas, yes, those unsafe areas did have were primarily minorities. But in terms of safe neighborhoods, the amount of minorities and majorities that were picked up were pretty much the same. And I made that video. It did not get a lot of pushback, I will admit. People, for the most part, agreed with me on that. I don't know if they'd agree with me on that today, but the bottom line is I commented on that. Would that video now get me kicked off of Patreon for having that point of view? For that matter, what about the many videos I have done about the assaults that happen to passengers when they get in their Uber Lyft rides? What about that story I did where a Uber driver shot a pedestrian and the Uber driver got arrested? Are those unpopular opinions not good enough for Patreon? Because here's the problem with Patreon. The way that it's being set up is that it's pretty clear that they suspended Sargon of Akkad not for using the slur, but because they didn't like his body of work. There have been other Patreon pages where actually had the slurs in the Patreon pages themselves that do not get removed, even though they have been flagged many, many times, which leads me to believe, should I be concerned about Patreon and should I consider deleting it? Now, granted, there are not a lot of people contributing to Patreon right now. There's just not. I make about $54 a month, which is enough to upgrade to a better microphone next year. So thank you to all the Patreon members who have helped with that. But most people are going to agree that $54 a month is not something that you're going to lose a lot of sleep over if you lose it. On the other hand, I don't do the auto withdrawals, so after a few months of not doing it, I go to Patreon, and now there's a few $100s there that I can withdraw for an emergency, like when you need to fix a tooth or something, which the tooth should get fixed in January, by the way. And I could just lose that. What happens if in a couple years, Uber is a publicly traded company and I make nasty comments about their CEO, which I am known to do? I am making those comments purely on the basis that he is a bad businessman, in my opinion, and he doesn't care about drivers. What if a group looks at my videos and they decide, you know what, I'm not making it for that reason. I'm making it for those reasons because I'm racist. I do not like Iranians. That is why I make those comments. Heck, it must be true. Look at the comments below. I unfortunately get some ugly comments from people who say things about his race, which it's like, dude, that is not why I don't like him. I don't like him for this reason. I dislike him just as much as I dislike Travis Kalanick, and he's as white as that paper over there. So, but you get the right people to complain. Patreon might snap their finger, I'm gone, and who knows, at that point, I might be making a few $100s a month on Patreon. You never know. So this kind of adds into the thing that I always tell people. Diversify. Have separate things going for you. Don't just do Uber. Don't just do Lyft. Don't just do eBay. Don't just do Amazon. Don't just do Etsy. Don't be on just Facebook. Don't be just on Twitter. Don't be just on Pinterest. Diversify. And by the way, I also post on Minds, and I was on VidMe when it was around. So I'm on Dailymotion. Heck if I know if anyone actually watches those videos, but I am on Dailymotion. So I diversify, but this Patreon thing has got me concerned because they now have a set of values that they have no order, that they don't believe in free speech. They've actually said that. You can watch Matt Christiansen's video. They have actually said they don't believe that they encourage free speech. It's like, and at that point, it's like, okay, well, but you're just a payment transaction company that I pay fees to. Why should the person who's handling my money transaction have a say in how I conduct my business or how I live my life? That is a very concerning thing to me. So I'm on the fence. I really am. I want to get rid of Patreon, but there's no competitor at the moment. And even if there was a competitor, some people might not use that competitor. So it's really tough. And this is where you get into very bad situations. What line am I not willing to cross with this company? For the time being, I'm going to keep the Patreon account, but I'm going to be keeping an eye out for alternatives. I'm going to try to push people to those alternatives if they want to support my work. And I'm hoping there's a day that comes by that either Patreon changes the way they do business, or I get enough support other places that I really don't need them. Unfortunately, and here's the thing, because I know people are going to crucify me this for making the admission, I do want to get rid of the Amazon store. I really, really do. But until my Etsy and eBay and Shopify stores, until they start bringing in enough money that I just don't need Amazon, or I can effectively tell Amazon to completely go screw themselves, I would love to do that. Right now, unfortunately, Amazon is still the bulk of the business, which South Park made some very interesting observations recently. Like, watch the last 2 episodes of season 21, or is it 22? I think it's 22 at this point, where they basically showed how, Amazon has recreated the slave wages in their own way. It's very fascinating. Anyway, I know this video is not going to get me a lot of fans. I might even lose a few subscribers, to be honest. But I would like to know what your thoughts are. Does this thing with Patreon concern you? Have you been personally affected by it? What do you think? I would love to know. So, comment below. Like, favorite, share, subscribe. I'm not going to say the other part. I'm actually, as step 1, going to start not promoting that people should go to Patreon, because I want to promote another service should one become available. But as always, flame responsibly. Have a good one.